Okay, great.
Yogi Chandramohan is an Indian English Dalit poet from Kerala. His poems were shortlisted for the Srinivas Rayaprol Poetry Contest in 2016. His second collection of poems, titled Letters to Namdeo Dasan, was a runner-up at the M. Harish Govind Memorial Prize instituted by Poetry Chain. He helped organize the literary meets with English poets of Kerala for the Ayappa Panikkar Foundation, in addition to being a fellow at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. So that's its formal introduction. The informal part is that Chandramohan and I know each other for 3 years now. We met in Bombay. We were poets in residence at a residency in Bombay organized by the U.S. consulate. We've written some poems together. We've done some joint readings, and we've stayed in touch. I'm a big fan of his work. I love his use of metaphors. I love how he uses his words. And I also love how Chandramohan often gets embroiled in controversies, especially those surrounding his identity. So I think we can talk to him a little bit about that. But we are talking poetry, so I think we must begin with P.S. reading a poem. Do you want to do that, Chandramohan?
Yeah. I'll start by reading, a poem that speaks to my heart. So
Okay,
this
great.
poem was composed at the. I believe you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So this poem was composed at the instance of the particular, at this particular moment when Rohit Vemula, I believe Rohit Vemula, his name is familiar to all of you. So he was a doctoral student at University of Hyderabad. His institutional murder, his suicide, which we term as institutional murder, triggered a lot of protest, a watershed moment in the history of Dalit protest. Dalit politics, and this poem was composed at that instance. And this poem, interestingly, is a reworking of the famous "Strange Fruit," a famous poem "Strange Fruit" by Abel Mirapol, and so this is like a reworking of that situation of that imagery into what happens in our country, India. So there are parallels drawn between lynching of Afro-Americans and the violence that Dalits and Bahojans and minority Muslims suffer in South Asia. The poem goes like this. The poem is titled "Killing the Shampuka." It's titled "Killing the Shampuka." Jim Crow segregated hostel rooms. Jim Crow segregated hostel rooms. Ceiling fans bear a strange fruit. Ceiling fans bear a strange fruit. Blood on books and blood on papers. Blood on books and blood on papers. A black body swinging in mute silence. A black body swinging in mute silence. Strange fruit hanging from tridents. Strange fruit hanging from tridents. Yeah. So these are the 5 lines. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Chandramohan. I mean, this is exactly what I was talking to the class um, about the metaphors you use and about your language. So, this is something I've talked to you before. Maybe this is something you want to address today as well. Um, what is it that made you choose writing in English? Because this is something that some of us, especially people like us that are writing in English today in India, we've often, been called unpatriotic for not writing in languages that are considered our mother tongue. Um, so have you ever faced that accusation, and what made you choose English as your language of poetry?
So I will begin to answer this question by quoting a poet whom we all know. His name is Derek Walcott. So there is a quote by Derek Walcott that English language is nobody's specific property. English language belongs to the world. It belongs to anyone who has access to this language, who can learn this language, read and own it up. He can use the language for as his medium of expression. So that's what I'm trying to say. So, but in a country like India, which is like a post, what is it? A Commonwealth nation which has colonial legacy. English is the language of the elite, and entry into English, like social circumstances, economic social circumstances, such that we get access to English language. It is very minuscule. English is accessible only to the elite in India.
Right.
So that remains a fact. But the situation with me was that I was schooled in this school by name Kendriya Vidyalaya. Probably you are familiar with Kendriya Vidyalaya. It's like a government.
Yeah.
It's like a central government institution,
Yeah.
where
The
the
central. Yeah.
syllabus is like
Your,
yeah, it started English, so it's like an English medium school. So like most of you are,
right.
it may have been the products of English medium education, and probably in West Bengal you get to learn Bangla, but in states like Kerala,
Yes.
Malayalam is not taught. Because like these are for like children of transferable jobs. Suppose somebody from Kerala is transferred to say
Right.
Delhi. If there is Malayalam being taught and Malayalam wouldn't be taught in Delhi, so such as these local language vernacular is excluded. So we used to learn English, Hindi, and Sanskrit. So as
Oh,
a
that's
result,
like Malayalam as a language in school.
yeah. So as a result, I haven't learned Malayalam to the extent which I can write in Malayalam. So, but it may seem very ironical that somebody like me,
Yeah.
who happened to eventually develop enough skill in English language to write poetry in English language, it has now become a major, very major empowering factor. It's leveraging me to like much bigger Anglophone visibility. It's like I could write about
Right.
past experience in Kerala, whatever, whatever I
Right.
write, there's a huge audience of typical Malayalam poet may never, may never, may never enjoy. So it's very so ironical. So to answer your question very briefly, very, very pointedly, I would say that it was by accident that I got schooled in English medium school. And as a result, I didn't have a choice. My first language happened to be English, though my mother tongue is Malayalam, and I do not write in Malayalam. I only read, but I do translate from Malayalam to English, but I can't do both ways. So I seriously envy somebody like Somrita who can translate both ways. It's like there is an extremely powerful bilinguality that she possesses, but I do not possess that. I may have like good English skills. That's something I'm happy about. But Malayalam, I just manage. I have roots in it. I can read and translate into English, but I cannot really converse. In the literary Malayalam, the Malayalam in which you write poetry. Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, really, I had no idea of the fact that institutionally you weren't taught Malayalam. Which is, I mean, it's kind of fascinating for me. Because I mean, you talked about my bilinguality, but I actually have a similar background where I actually studied in English, and then the other language I studied was Hindi. I did learn Bangla, and the assumption was also that Bangla is my mother tongue. I would know it, and I actually knew very little of it. Of course, I was talking in Bangla, but I hardly read in Bangla, and I hardly wrote in Bangla. And it was, I mean, much later after I left the States and I started living in Delhi that I almost taught myself the language anew. I would start reading magazines, I would start reading newspapers, and that's how I picked up Bengali. And it's sort of, it's not something to confess to people now because the moment I say the attack is, but Bangla is your mother tongue. How do you not know it? I mean, I think there is a vast difference between knowing a language and knowing it enough to be able to write in that language. This is something I also tell you as a class that when writing, especially creative writing, any form of art like poetry or stories or writing, you need to write in the language that you have control over, that you have grasp over, because it doesn't make sense to
Yeah, exactly.
to write in a language that you only have half-baked knowledge of, because eventually that work is not going to survive. Um, Survive the test of time. So, which is why this is my next related question for Chandramohan. Uh, how important do you think is grammar and syntax in composition? Because we are living in this sort of Instagram poetry world, and on Instagram and on Facebook, sab kuch chalta hai, all language is permissible. Um, but how does it really work when it comes to the publishing world? How important is language? The choice of language.
Yeah, I believe language, every intricacy of language is as important as it has been since time immemorial. The importance of
Yeah.
syntax, grammatical nuances, phrases, exploring the beauty of a phrase, striving for one's own idiom in a language. These are as pertinent as ever. But what we should try to do is we should learn all these and subvert them creatively. That is, break the grammatics such that sexism in the language is neutralized, or break the
Right.
what is it? This syntax such that certain hierarchies are what is it? Are done away with. We should first learn the
Yeah.
language as it is, with all its rules and regulations, and try to write it as perfectly as what is it, as scholarly and as we should be like a committed poet, committed writer in the
Yeah.
language with
Yeah.
proper as you conduct your class right now. I remember your small talk on translation at your residency in Mumbai, December 2017. Should be as
Yeah.
impeccable as that. But once we have mastered it, we could try
Yeah.
attempting certain subversive transgressions that critique all these rules and regulations. Yeah, yeah,
Of us who are listening to this conversation class, I also want to highlight what you just said. It is very important to know the language or the tradition before you critique it, before you subvert it, before you play around with it. You need to know it enough. Like you can
exactly,
always say, I don't
exactly,
like Shakespeare, I don't like Tagore, but you need to know Shakespeare and Tagore enough to go and say why you don't like him, and then subvert these guys. Sorry,
exactly.
were you saying something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, exactly, exactly. That's exactly my
Yeah.
comment. Yeah, yeah.
So Chandramohan, why don't you tell us something about the controversy that that uh,
There's a background noise, I believe. Like some of your microphones, if they're not speaking, maybe you can switch off the microphone from others. Yeah, there's a lot of noise,
you
background noise. Yeah, yeah,
uh, yeah,
yeah.
okay, this is better. Perfect.
Now it's better. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Chandramohan, yeah. So I was saying, for the class, that Chandramohan insists on calling himself an Indian English Dalit poet, Indian plus English plus Dalit poet. And very often people have asked him in unflattering and mean ways, why do you call yourself a Dalit poet? Why is that part of your identity important? It's almost like asking, why would I call myself a female poet or a woman poet? Or why would you call yourself a poet from a gender minority or a poet with a disability? So in other words, the question is, why are people so worried about the identity that I want to assert, right? So, Chandramohan, why is it important for you to assert this identity, and how have you been able to do this so far?
Yeah, that's a very important question. So, if I were to draw some parallels from your particular situation, from your life, I would like to say that if Somrita feels a pressing need to assert that she is a woman poet, quote unquote woman poet, or a quote unquote a feminist
Yeah,
poet, or quote unquote
yeah,
a poet of a particular persuasion, if there is a
yeah,
pressing need for that,
yeah,
she is very well welcome to use that. So,
yeah,
my objective in calling myself a Dalit poet is to trigger, to provoke a discussion on caste privilege. So immediately,
right,
like the people who are not Dalit, they will immediately ponder on the question that they themselves are not Dalit. So in that aspect, they are privileged. So that kickstarts
yeah,
imagination, a course of what is it? A chain of imaginative events. It will trigger new ideas in their mind to deconstruct
yeah,
themselves. That's number one. Number second is that
yeah,
uh, there is also this particular analogy sort of given to me that I could have two choices. First is that I am a Dalit. Second, I'm a poet. I'm not a Dalit poet, but
yeah,
my poetry speaks for it. There is no need to say Dalit
yeah,
poet. I'm a Dalit. I'm a poet,
yeah,
and my poetry speaks for it. That's one way of defining yourself. Another way is I'm a Dalit poet. So I think this is about the priority of politicizing oneself. So if I want to like politicize my very subjectivity as a poet, then I would want to call myself
yeah,
as a Dalit. But I think in this
yeah,
juncture, it's very, very important because I observe that in English poetry, maybe the first ever English poet to openly claim that she or he was Dalit was Meena Kandasamy. And
That's right.
and she's just a couple of years older than me. That means we have just
Yeah.
very less. We are just arriving. English
Yeah.
poets who hail from erstwhile untouchables are just arriving,
Yeah.
and it's very
Yeah.
necessary to, what is it, broaden the discourse. What is
Yeah.
it? Engage with the discourse of writing poetry
Yeah.
by asserting that
Yeah.
we are Dalit, and that how
Yeah.
this will trigger larger discussions in the discourse of this particular medium in English poetry. Yeah.
So just to sort of further complicate this idea, have you ever, the class and I, we were talking about Gayatri Chakraborty's Spivak the other day and her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? And obviously the answer to that is yes, the subaltern can speak. Can you hear? But another
Yeah, exactly.
question,
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
India in particular, that we need to be asking is, can the subaltern speak in English? Or
Yeah.
should the subaltern speak in English? There are Dalit writers
Yeah.
in Bengal who write in Bangla, and it
Uh,
seems to be, that the vernacular language is the language of priority. Do you want to hierarchize languages like that? If you're talking about the Dalit experience, should you be doing that in a vernacular language, or what do you feel about doing it in English?
yeah, yeah. So it's very it's very smart that you've brought in the concept of Spivak's question: Can the subaltern speak? And the answer is they can speak, but can you hear? That's one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Secondly, this is
yeah.
what all major Dalit critics have said. They've been speaking for time immemorial, just that their voice
Mm,
has not been incorporated in the discourse. That's one.
mm,
Secondly, I remember a comment by U.R. Anandamurthy that we
yeah,
may never ever hear Dalit literature in English. So he had made such disparaging comments that Dalit
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
creative enterprise in English language, creative endeavors in English language are off limits to Dalits. Probably like in the West, a lot of conservative thinkers may have thought that no Afro-American would ever write a novel in English,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not true.
yeah,
It's not true. But then
yeah,
they might have thought so. They might have thought so. But
yeah,
sadly, I believe he died in the year 2016. Or I don't know. I don't know which year he died. But whatever, he didn't. Had he been alive for another 10 years or so, I'm confident that there will be at least a handful of writers who can be characterized as writers first in the English language, and secondly, they have a
right,
subjectivity as Dalit. That's one thing. Secondly,
right,
so
right.
in this whole process of Can the Subaltern Speak, there is this
Yeah,
act of translation that I believe you have very
yeah,
intimately engaged with. The act of translation can seriously tame a writer, like a narrative that Ms. Kalyani Thakur or
mm,
Manoranjan Vyapari or
yeah.
there's Murali Manohar, those writers, what they
Murli,
have written, it could be
yeah,
easily tamed and made suitable for academic discourse without the by fusing, I don't know, by reducing the subversive content they have. They can be
yeah,
easily taken on board. But what
yeah,
what is a rupture in the discourse, quote unquote rupture in the
yeah,
discourse that I aspire to, that can be easily neutralized, and it's like, I don't know. It's like I had tried to write a poem, Love After Babylon, which I had compared a poem and its translation to lopsided breasts, and I had argued that one of them could be a well-rounded cuss word, like poetry of Namdeo Dasal, and post-translation it can become a pear-shaped sagging cliche, something like that.
yeah,
So that is
yeah.
something I believe Dalit writers themselves have not really voiced their opinion. Probably English Dalit writers will deal with this issue very intimately, will scrutinize this. That will result in a phase two of Dalit literature in which there is a higher level of intellectual acumen. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so yes, tell me about what's happening in the poetry scene in India right now. I mean, from what I understand, it is very, very difficult to sell poetry in India. What
yeah.
is your experience of it? I mean, why are we learning to be poets? Why are we aspiring to be poets? Do we have publishers that are willing to risk in poetry?
Yeah, I believe the lack of market for poetry is crucial for its
Yeah,
subversive element. Moment there is
yeah,
market for poetry, moment there is like a lot of advance paid to you, the moment you can have a literary agent representing you and negotiating with corporate book publishers, I believe you can be easily, what is it, incorporated by the what is it, co-opted by the market, and that can be detrimental for poetry in the long run. So the state of affairs we are in right now, in which poetry has a lesser amount of market, quote unquote market, and economic viability. Even very accomplished poets self-publish their books. They shell out like 20,000 of their money, their own money, and publish copies which are sold in their friend circle. So this has a very I don't know, a very extremely subversive economic leverage. So the moment you have a huge audience, the moment you have economic viability attached to poetry, I believe that will seriously hamper its free spirit. I don't know. Yeah. So that's one thing. Secondly, I believe that Indian English poetry is at the cusp of a big change. There are lots and lots of Indian English poets now. In another 10 years or so, poetry may become sellable. It's both a boon and a bane. I believe that if there are more and more creative writing classes, more and more contemporary poetry incorporated into school and college syllabi, I believe there will be closer scrutiny of poetry. That is very good, but there can also be other, commercial elements denting into the, heart and soul of poetry. Yeah.
बिकाऊ बन जाएंगे नहीं so sold out writers.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Being co-opted,
I
being
never
a sellout.
thought of it from that point of view. Yeah. So how do you think this bunch of young aspiring writers, how do you think they should go about publishing? You know, because as we just discussed, there's not much marketability for poetry, which I'm beginning to learn from you is actually a great thing. It's a blessing in disguise. But what are the other platforms, you know, other than these big corporates? Where else can they take their poetry? Where else can they publish when they are beginning as writers?
What I suggest is once a poem is ready and you have revised it enough and you're ready to release a poem to the world, you should try submitting it to like premier poetry journals in the West. For example, Poetry Chicago, Prairie Schooner, like AGNI, Agni, and there are many. Rattle. There are many. India also has something called Indian Literature, published by Sahitya Academy. Though it runs with a lot of delay and all, still it publishes good quality stuff. And we should try our best to scrounge for good platforms to submit poems. So once you have enough number of poems to publish, I believe there are publishing houses like Poetry Wala, Copper Coin, Havakal, Havakal, or there are these like Red River Press. There are these publishing houses who publish on their own. The author needn't pay money.
Independent publishers.
They publish it. They are small presses, but they publish on their own. So the moment you have enough number of poems, you can submit a chapbook or a full length collection. You can slowly approach them. By the time the journals and other magazines where your poems have already appeared, they add to your resume. And secondly, keep devouring other poets. Like read as much as you can. Be familiar with any other poet, any poet writing in English, contemporary as well as in the past. And like just keep yourself abreast of any work of arts, be it dance, music, cinema, painting, anything. All these nourish your creative soul. All these nourish your way of thinking. All these replenish the ideas that you have in your mind. So just keep learning, keep writing, and poetry is ultimately about language. So read as much as you can the language in which you write. Yeah.
What is the average length of a chapbook? About 30 poems?
I believe like a chapbook is usually like I don't know, some 25 pages totally, including all the poems done in the layout format. Layout with some illustrations if you want, and maybe a couple of blurbs or so if you want. Like it can be short, and for example, most of you can jot down stuff, your experiences during the Corona times, where this could be like unprecedented in history. We are stay at home now, so you could have really radically new stuff that coming up. And I remember that post 9/11, a lot of commoners had written poetry. A lot of heterodox non-poets who had not previously distinguished themselves as with accreditations as poets had attempted poetry, and they were like published in various newspapers and all. So this could be a deja vu moment. Just be positive. Keep as writing and reading.
And I mean, a full-length book could include as many as 50 to 60 poems. So, this is for the class. You don't have to aim for a full-length book immediately. You can start small. A chapbook, as Chandramohan just pointed out, requires 25 to 30 solid poems. So start building your portfolio, right? And then the other thing which Chandramohan mentioned earlier, and I want to come back to that, is this question of editing. Like most of the poets that we know or have been studying in the canon have made us believe that poetry is the powerful overflow of spontaneous feelings. But really, how spontaneous should poetry be? What is the role that editing plays in the final product?
Yeah. So I believe, but maybe so the quote by the quote in which you say poetry is the spontaneous overflow power of feelings.
Yeah.
I think the full quote has this part also. Yeah, it's called recollected in tranquility. They say that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Recollected in tranquility. So I believe the
Yeah.
contemporary poetry worldwide is very analytical.
Yeah.
Like people apply a lot of thought process. People apply a lot of technique. People apply a very judicious choice of words. People
Yeah.
apply extreme care to the form, content, and the overall objective of the poem. So
Yeah.
I believe for each and every poet, it's different. Like many may want to have a certain flow with their poem. They're more worried about a songliness in their poem, or some others are more worried about not slipping into sloganeering, or some are more worried about image density, whatever. Or some are very particular about quote unquote political correctness. Many are more worried about the I don't know. So all this is up to the writer. A
Right.
poet needn't like worry about this. Like just keep reading, keep writing. That's what I would say.
Okay, so besides that one suggestion, which I have repeated in the class over and over again, that a good writer needs to be a good reader first, I'm not sure if I've inspired them enough to take up reading seriously. What else? What else would you advise? What else would your suggestions be to this bunch of young poets that we have in the class? We've been doing some poetry assignments. We started with haiku, and then we moved on to free verse. And some of them actually have immense clarity of thought and some very powerful ideas. So what would your advice be to this bunch that is now navigating the world of?
So what I would suggest is that just keep writing, irrespective of your writing being called poetry or short fiction or even creative nonfiction. Just write down what you should be writing. It can be categorized as poetry. It can be even categorized as flash fiction, in the sense that it's
Yeah.
more narrative based than what one would call as poetry. Or maybe it's like it's not even fiction. It's just your account of a day, which is like creative nonfiction, whatever. So it could
Yeah.
be in any genre, and just keep writing. And always like once you've written, just read through it and look for the music and the sound. So the ones you get some kind of rhythm over yourself, that can take you a long way. Like you could slowly read what you've written uh, with a volume that you can hear. Okay, slowly read it slowly, and you can look for a music in the rhythm in which you have written. Once you get that rhythm, once you find your own rhythm, you're finding your voice. So that's what everybody is about.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chandramohan. These are the questions that I had prepared for you, but I now, I would declare the floor open, as they would say. And can we take some questions, queries from the class, those who've been writing? If you have pointed questions, don't feel afraid. If you have questions for Chandramohan, we can take them now. And if you want me to stop recording, I can do that, and you can ask the questions after we are done. We can actually stop recording here.